Hey everyone, welcome. Today we are diving into a really powerful AI concept called customer embeddings. We're going to explore how this is completely rewriting the rulebook for how banks assess risk, giving them a much deeper and more accurate picture of their customers.
All right, so here's the game plan. We'll kick things off by looking at why the old ways of assessing risk just aren't cutting it anymore. Then we'll get into the good stuff, what these customer embeddings are, how you'd build a system around them, how the AI actually makes decisions, and then we'll wrap it all up with how you take this from a cool idea to a real-world solution.
All right, first up, the problem with traditional risk. Before we can really appreciate the new stuff, we've got to understand what's broken with the old way of doing things. It really sets the stage for why this innovation is so badly needed. So, that really brings us to the big question here. Banks are sitting on mountains of data, right? So why do their risk systems still feel so rigid and a little bit outdated? Why do they struggle with all this complexity?
Well, the old process is just so linear. A request comes in, the system goes and pulls structured data, things like account balances and credit scores from a bunch of different places. It applies some fixed, rigid rules and spits out a simple yes or no. The biggest weakness here? It's what gets completely ignored. All that rich, unstructured data, like notes from a customer service call or the back and forth in an email chain, all that valuable context is just lost.
Okay, so that's the problem. And that brings us to the really exciting part, the innovation, customer embeddings. The whole goal here is to take absolutely everything a bank knows about a customer and distill it down into a single, powerful digital fingerprint. So, this is the million-dollar question, right? How do you possibly take a person's entire financial life, every single transaction, every conversation, every little data point, and translate all of that into a format that an AI can actually understand and use? And the answer is the customer embedding. Now, instead of thinking about a customer as just a row in a database table, imagine representing them as a single point on a really complex map. This point, which is just a string of numbers we call a vector, doesn't just list their data. It actually captures the meaning and the relationships between all of it. It even understands the text. It gives them a totally unique financial identity. Okay, but you might be thinking, what really makes this so much better? I mean, why is this one vector so much more powerful than just pulling a few dozen columns from a database like we've always done? Well, the advantages are just huge. For starters, these embeddings automatically figure out super complex relationships in the data. That makes it incredibly easy to find customers who look alike from a risk perspective. And here's the real game changer. They can finally make sense of all that unstructured text from notes and emails, the stuff older systems just had to ignore. On top of that, they're better at handling missing data. And because the input is always a consistent vector, the whole system becomes way easier to maintain over time. All right, so we get the what. Now let's talk about the how. What does the architecture for a system like this actually look like? How do we build it to move, like it says here, from these rigid flows to something much more dynamic and intelligent? Okay, let's get down to brass tacks. What does the actual workflow for an embedding-based risk system look like, step by step? So here's the new flow, and it's pretty cool. First, you train a big foundational model specifically on financial data. We'll call it an FMFD. This model becomes an expert in the language of finance. Then, you use that model to generate 3 separate embedding vectors, one for the customer, one for the product they're asking for, and one for the transaction itself. You feed all 3 of these into a decision-making LLM. And what it spits out isn't just a simple yes or no. It's a much smarter, more nuanced output. Things like approval, maybe a specific interest rate, or even suggestions for other products. Okay, let's zoom in on the real brains of the operation, the decision engine itself. This is where it all comes together. So we have these 3 different embeddings: customer, product, and transaction. How do they all get combined to give the AI the full, complete picture it needs to make a really smart decision? This combination is really the magic sauce here. You've got the customer embedding, that's the past, all their history and behaviors. Then you have the product embedding, that's the what, the specific thing they're asking for. And finally, the transaction embedding, that's the now, the real-time details of this specific request. When you put all 3 together, you give the LLM a complete 360-degree view of the entire situation. Okay, this all sounds great in theory, but now for the really practical part. How does a bank actually take this from a concept on a slide and turn it into a real-world working system?
Yeah, because let's be real, in a highly regulated industry like banking, you can't just flip a switch and change everything. So, what are those critical first moves you have to make to lay the proper groundwork for a project of this scale?
You absolutely have to get this groundwork right. First things first, you have to break down those data silos and consolidate your data. Second, security and compliance can't be an afterthought. They have to be built in from day one. Third, you've got to define what success even looks like, set clear goals and KPIs. And finally, and this one is so important, start small. Don't try to boil the ocean. Pick one product line, run a proof of concept, and prove the value before you go big. Okay, so you've got the technical plan, but a project like this also requires a totally different kind of team, right? What sort of skills do you actually need in the room to bring this all to life? Yeah, this is not your typical IT project. You're going to need top-tier data scientists, you'll need specialized LLM ops engineers, and of course, cloud architects. But, and this is absolutely crucial, you also need AI ethics and interpretability specialists. In banking, being able to explain why your model made a certain decision isn't just a nice to have, it's a flat-out regulatory requirement. You have to ensure the whole thing is fair and transparent. So, to wrap it all up, the big takeaway is this. We're moving away from these clunky, fragmented data systems and rigid rules, and we're moving towards a unified, dynamic, and truly intelligent understanding of each and every customer. Customer embeddings are the technology that makes that huge leap possible. And that leaves us with a really big final thought. If you can represent a customer's entire financial world as a single intelligent vector, the possibilities go way beyond just risk assessment. Think about what this could do for marketing, for product development, for customer service. So the real question isn't what this will change, but really, what won't it? Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. If you found this useful, do me a favor and hit that like button, share it with someone, and subscribe for more explainers just like this one. We'll see you in the next one.